Okay, so for today's lecture session, we will be talking about the nervous system. So actually, the nervous system has been introduced to us during our Beta 105 or Microscopic Anatomy 1, wherein it's actually the last type of main tissue which we discussed. But of course, since we are talking about the organ system this time around, we will consider the organization of the nervous tissue into several organs this time. And of course, the main type of basic tissue classification that is most abundant in the nervous system would naturally be your nervous tissue. Okay? Aside from the nervous tissue, of course, it has to be arranged. It has to follow a basic body plan, and it has to be put this tissue to be put and organized with other types of tissue in order to function as an organ system. So we would have your connective tissue as well. Okay. So it's basically your nervous tissue. So if you will remember, nervous tissue is quite special because among all the four major types of tissues, it is the one which has super high cellularity, the same with epithelial tissue, but it does not have any basement membrane or basal lamina. What else? Unlike your connective tissue, it doesn't have a lot or it doesn't have an abundant amount of extracellular matrix. So basically, your nervous tissue is just a clump, a tight clump of very specialized cells. Okay? Of course, later we will learn that there are several different types of cells that comprise your nervous tissue as well as your nervous system organs. Okay? So, of course, when we say nervous system, the organs that are included in it would be, of course, your organs which belong to your central nervous system, such as your brain, and your spinal cord. So this is your central nervous system. So majority of the synthesizing of the information, production of the information, and the start of the propagation of the information occurs in the central nervous system, in the spinal cord, and in the brain. And then, of course, the nervous system should be able to propagate this information away to the different areas of the body and also receive information from the different areas of the body back into the central nervous system. So that system which allows for the spread of the nervous system in all other areas of the body aside from your spinal cord and your brain, that would be your peripheral nervous system. So that would be the presence of your ganglions and the nerve trunks or fibers themselves. Okay? So that's the two major division of your nervous system. The central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay? Again, that's just for review. What makes nervous tissue special first? It is the only tissue, it is the only organ system that is composed of a tissue that has the ability to create and propagate electric signals. Okay? So these electrical signals are used by the neurons specifically of your nervous tissue in order to talk to other neurons or to talk to other cells in the other organ systems. Okay? That's why the cells are so specialized. And since the cells are so specialized in their function, we would also expect that their morphology is also very specialized. Okay? What else? It is only the nervous system which has the neuropil. Okay, the neuropil is actually the collection of the dendrites of your neurons with the dendrites of your astrocytes, etc. And this is only present in the central nervous system. Okay. Um, Other students usually make the mistake of comparing this to the extracellular matrix, but actually it's not the extracellular matrix. But later we will discuss this more. Okay. Next is that for some components of your nervous tissue or nervous system, there is the ability to change the shape and function depending on the requirements, the physiological requirements of the animal. So that's what you call plasticity, right? Because when you say something is plastic, what does it mean? Something is pliable, di ba? Something is malleable. That's what plasticity means, okay? Then, as what we said earlier, it has very limited to none to no extracellular matrix, unlike your connective tissue, which mainly functions based on the what? Based on the physicochemical characteristics of its extracellular matrix, right? If you will remember, this is really important in our past topic, which is your musculoskeletal system, wherein there's a lot of connective tissue there, uh, specifically your supportive connective tissue, specifically your cartilage and your bone, wherein the hardness of the extracellular matrix due to the deposition of either calcium or other stuff uh, dictates the function of the whole organ. Okay, in this case, in the nervous tissue, there is no need for this extracellular matrix, and instead, what we will see, at least in the central nervous system, so in the brain and the spinal cord, would be your neuropil. Okay? All right. So, for the nervous tissue and connective tissue, so the connective tissue again is in charge in organizing the different structures of the nervous tissue into specific subparts. Okay? So, if you will remember, our two major architectural classification of our organs. Can you remember that? Yung si parenchymatous and tubular. So, in the context of our brain and spinal cord, what do you think? So, technically, it's supposed to be parenchymatous, right? But, but, later we will realize that there's actually a cavity within it, right? So this is what I'm telling you about how the body is not really binary. Even if there are specific subtypes, there will always be the in between. Okay, but of course, since the brain doesn't really function to carry ingesta, blood, or air, then technically it is still a parenchymatous type of organ because the main function is still being exerted by the cellular components, which functions in not really metabolizing but actually the control of all the other organ systems within the body that is composed of other tissue components. Okay. So, of course, again, we have our brain for the central nervous system. So here you can see it. This is actually a um, mouse brain or possibly a rat brain cut um, longitudinally in the middle part, and this one is cut at this area in the cerebellum. And as you can see, it's so pretty. And then we also have our spinal cord cut somewhere here. Okay. And here you can see, oh, other tissue components is not nervous in nature. So most likely, this would be your connective tissue. Okay? And then, you would also have your nervous tissue in the peripheral area. So this is now, the other two later, they were parts of the central nervous system. Now, some examples of your peripheral nervous system. We would have your clump or aggregate of cell bodies of your neurons outside the spinal cord in the brain, your ganglia. as well as the collection of axons, bundle of axons. And here you have also a ganglia, but this one is found in between the muscle layers of a GIT system. So later we will talk more about that. But all of these are members of the peripheral nervous system. So first, let's talk about how the nervous tissue develops. We may have already touched upon this in the first topic, no, wherein we discussed that in the beginning, during gastrulation, the embryo will develop three distinct layers. The uppermost layer, which is usually colored blue in references, would be your ectoderm. And apparently, bulk of your nervous tissue, if not almost all, comes from this layer, the ectoderm. So the notochord will actually signal the upper layer to eventually form folds, and subsequently, in between these folds, a groove will develop. And then, this groove will become deeper and deeper until these two folds will eventually meet first in the middle area, and then eventually it will fuse to form a tube. And here you can see that there's also the formation of your neural crest cells. So for some parts of the nervous system that is not part of this neural tube, such as your ganglia, your chromaffin cells in your adrenal medulla, those will actually come from the neural crest and not the neural tube, because the neural tube uh, will only give rise to your brain and spinal cord, and then the sprouting of your axons as well from there. Okay, so the other neuron-like cells within the body, scattered in the far-flung areas of the body, usually they arise from your neural crest cells. That's why other references would actually quote-unquote call your neural crest the fourth germ layer, because it's quite special, and it is the sole origin of some very, very specific cells and structures in the body, in the adult body. Okay? So here, you can see that in the beginning, we just have a plain tube, and then eventually this plain tube will form bulges, and each bulging segment would have a different name. So you would have your prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon, and eventually, as the embryo elongates and develops more as it ages, these specific segments will become more specialized, and it will have more outpocketings, and it can even subdivide into two segments. And finally, these segments will eventually form the different adult brain structures. So for the adult brain structures, it will be this one only, the wall, okay, of your neural tube, because the central area will actually turn into the ventricles of the brain. Okay? So that's why earlier I am a little bit arguing that maybe the brain is also a little bit a kind of a tubular organ. Okay? Maybe. Okay? Maybe in some another point of view, right? Because it has your ventricle. But of course, in the final form of the brain, all of these walls here will be the one that will become most developed, and the cavity inside will become smaller and smaller, because its only purpose will be to, of course, facilitate the flow of the production and the flow of spinal fluid, which functions in the cushioning of this very, very soft and very sensitive clump of specialized cells within the hard, bony shell or exterior of your skull, or your spinal, or your spine vertebral canal. Okay? Okay, so after this tube-like structure, it will eventually turn into this. So here you will see the 5 embryonic brain divisions here will eventually give rise to 3 major divisions in the adult. So you have your cerebrum, your cerebellum, and your brainstem. So before, the cerebellum came from the telencephalon, while um, the brain stem actually came from four different areas. Okay. So, recently, I have been into exploring uh, new species to work on my neuroscience career because, as I told during my class intersection, I am a neuroscientist, and that's what I studied during my graduate studies abroad. And during that time, we focused on the usual animal that's usually investigated in terms of neuroscience will be your laboratory mice or rat. Okay, but recently here in the Philippines, I have been involved in studies involving the fish, specifically your tilapia, so your Oreochromis niloticus. So I have been developing a protocol wherein I would be able to slice open the head of the tilapia fish, and here you can see this is the fish brain. And apparently, in the fish brain, unlike in your higher vertebrate brains, wherein the brain will develop more into its final structure, in the fish brain, the names of the subdivisions is still retained. You still have your telencephalon, your diencephalon, your mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon, even in the adult stage. So maybe it makes sense because these animals, maybe their physiology did not require them to have a more mature and more developed version of the brain. So this photo is an actual slide that has been produced by our histotechnic lab by Kuya Joey. Yan. And ano ba to? This is actually my writing. This is actually part of my notes. So this is an ongoing study at the moment. So we are at the year two already. But yeah, it's interesting because I was not aware of this before because I was not focused with fish. But it's interesting to examine the different processes that can affect fish brain as well, especially in the context of water pollution in the lakes around San Pablo, Laguna. Okay? Anyway, let's go back to the nervous tissue and what it is composed of. So, of course, the primary component of your nervous tissue would be the cells and a little bit of extracellular matrix or even actually almost none. Okay? Aside from the cells, in the central nervous system, you would also have the presence of your neuropil, only in the brain and in the spinal cord. Okay? So, the uh, primary movers of your nervous tissue, the one that gives the function, the actual function of nervous tissue, would be your neurons. And these neurons can be classified based into two types, based on its function and based on its structure. Okay? So let's uh, review ourselves about the different types of neurons and how we can classify it. Because if we are able to classify the different types of neurons, we will be able to properly describe different areas of the spinal cord and the brain or the ganglia. Okay? For neurons, structure-wise, we have unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. Unipolar because only one pole or one end of the nuclear cell body gives rise to a process. And other references would argue since this process will eventually split into a lateral and peripheral branch, then in essence, it's not a true unipolar neuron. It's pseudo in nature. But anyway, unipolar, pseudo-unipolar, both are acceptable, at least in our case. Okay? Then finally, we have the bipolar. So for the bipolar, you have one axon. So again, as a reminder, each neuron, no matter what its structure, it can only have one axon. But for the dendrite, it can have one up to many dendrites. Okay? So for the bipolar type, you have one axon and one dendrite. Again, The dendrites will be the ones that receive information, and it will be processed in the cell body or the pericardium, and then after processing, the axon hillock will then decide if it will propagate the information processed down the axon to another dendrite of another neuron, or to an organ such as a muscle organ or other visceral organ. Okay? And the most numerous among the three types based on structure would be our multipolar. So your multipolar neurons have a lot of poles involved. It has again one axon and more than one dendrite. Okay? As long as the neuron has more than one dendrite, then it's enough to call it as or consider it as multipolar neuron. Okay? Now, function-wise, we have three types. Okay, we have your sensory neuron, which mainly functions to sense, no? So the function of your sensory neuron is to receive information from the areas of the body, the sensory organs of your body, for example, the surface of the skin, the retina of your eyes, somewhere in your cochlea, anywhere that can receive stimuli. And then its function is to receive this and allow it to travel receive it and allow it to travel straight into your interneurons in the central nervous system. So this is usually your spinal cord, wherein the interneurons will be the one that will analyze the information given. Okay, so the sensory neuron is technically unipolar or pseudo-unipolar in structure. Okay? While the interneuron, which is usually the neuron that is in between your sensory and your motor neurons, its structure is your multipolar type. Okay? So, after talking with the sensory neuron, receiving information from the sensory neuron, your interneuron will then receive it, then process it, and give it to the motor neuron. Okay? So, the motor neuron's goal is to act as the motor that will tell other organs, oh, you have to do this, you have to contract, or you have to inhibit your function because this is what is being required of the body based on the stimuli that was received by the sensory neuron. Okay? So here you will see that the motor neuron is usually in the context of musculoskeletal system, it is connected to your muscle. Okay? And here you can see that among the three types, your sensory neuron and your motor neurons will usually have your longer axons. Thus, they will be needing the presence of your myelin sheath. We will discuss this more again later. Okay? So here, again, we have your pseudo-unipolar or unipolar neurons located in the sensory ganglion, wherein it will receive information in one axon. Then, since it doesn't need to analyze this information in the cell body anymore, so this cell body does not need the additional dendrites. Okay? So it doesn't need that. So, thus, the cells of your pseudo-unipolar neurons are very round, and it's not stellate like your motor and sensory neurons because it doesn't have dendrites. Okay? So here, and then the information from the sensory area will go directly into the interneuron. It doesn't need to be synthesized and analyzed in the cell body. Okay? That's why the cell body is very circular. It doesn't need any dendrites. It doesn't need to go to other um, neurons within the ganglion. Okay? So the cell body of the neuron here in the ganglion basically just serves for the support and the structural integrity of the axon part. Okay? Again, unipolar, pseudo-unipolar in structure, sensory in function. Okay? While for the multipolar neuron. So again, multipolar because 1, 2, 3, or more than one na agad. Already more than one dendrite and one axon. So since it has dendrites, it's not perfectly round, okay? It is stellate in shape when usually seen under the microscope. Okay? And here you can see that a characteristic feature in order to differentiate your dendrites or your processes of your neuron which receives information is that your dendrites would have the presence of these dark bluish violet dots. So this would be your Nissl body. So these Nissl bodies actually correspond to the endoplasmic reticulum containing free ribosome. So it is important because there is always the need for the neuron to package um, substances so that it can talk to other neurons, specifically your neurotransmitters. So it really needs that abundance of endoplasmic uh, reticulum structures. What else? If the dendrite has Nissl substance up until its very edge, the axon hillock or the attachment of the axon to the cell body where the nucleus is and where the information is being synthesized, the axon does not need or does not contain this a lot of endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes because it does not function to create something and to send neurotransmitters. Its function is just to propagate whatever was received and analyzed in the cell body and in the dendrites. That's why your axon is more lighter staining and it will start with the axon hillock. So the connection of the axon to the cell body, which is quite transparent and does not contain Nissl substance. Okay? So again, your multipolar can be an interneuron, a neuron that bridges the connection between your sensory and your motor neurons. So these interneurons are usually located in the gray matter of your spinal cord as well as in the gray matter of your brain. Okay? Motor neurons are also multipolar in shape. So if you look at them under the microscope, they would be stellate shaped because of the presence of multiple dendrites out processing from its cell body. And then for the bipolar type, this is usually seen in your sensory layers. So here we have actually your retina. And in the inner nuclear layer, you will be seeing the presence of the cell bodies of your bipolar neurons. Okay? So, bipolar in structure and also sensory in function, just like your um, unipolar and pseudo-unipolar sensory neurons in the ganglia. So if it is in the ganglia, the structure is different. It's unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. But if it's in the retina, the structure is bipolar. But both of them, their function is to sense and collect stimuli from the environment. Okay? Aside from the structure and function, the neurons can also be categorized based on the neurotransmitter that they are producing. So in different areas of the brain, uh, the even if they are all composed of neurons, specific neurons are tailored or has been planned to produce specific neurotransmitters. So there are hundreds of neurotransmitters. There are even synthetic ones, diba? So technically, the drugs that are very addictive, they are basically synthetic neurotransmitters which function as exogenous or additional outside source of substances that has the power to actually alter the mechanism or physiological function of your neurons and hence alter the function of the other parts of the body. That's why they are so powerful, especially the psychostimulants. Okay? So here, of course, the natural neurotransmitters, the most famous are your glutamate. So you have your glutamatergic neuron, which basically functions to excite other neurons. The GABA producing or GABAergic neurons, which mainly functions to inhibit other neurons. Then we have the dopamine producing neurons, which functions in the reward, movement, and motivation functions of the animal. And then we also have your cholinergic, which functions in muscle movement, memory, and learning. And as what I have said before, these neurotransmitters uh, classification is only uh, possible to be identified microscopically, visually through the use of what kind of staining is this? Brown, and uses uh, antibodies. This would be your immunohistochemistry, okay? So this picture is actually taken from my actual experiment when I was doing my graduate studies. And here that you can see that this is actually taken from the brain of a mouse model of Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is a disease which involves the loss of dopaminergic neurons in the specific areas of the brain such as your substantia nigra and your striatum. So here you can see in the upper part, we have a normal brain, and in the lower part, we try to induce Parkinson's-like symptoms in the animal model, which is a rat, and you can see that the level or intensity of the brown color for dopamine was greatly reduced. Okay, so again, through this the MPTP chemical, we injected it in the mice peritoneally, and it induced tremors, shaking, so the telltale signs of Parkinson's in humans. So that's why this animal was able to replicate what Parkinson's is in humans using mice, and it is also able to replicate that even in the cellular level. Okay. And then for GABAergic neurons, you can also use, again, the use of antibodies, but this time instead of the use of DAP, we will use fluorescence microscope and the fluorescence dye. So in this case, we have your red color for your uh, GABAergic neurons. And I think this one is also either dopaminergic or cholinergic. And again, you can see here that it is the brown staining cells are the ones that can be classified as dopamine producing neurons or dopaminergic neurons. Okay. So, I'd like to share also, speaking of these different neurons and different transmitters that they mainly produce. So, I have a not really recent last year, I'm so happy to share my study with my collaborators, no? So, this paper actually took, can you guess? 7 years before we can finish it. But finally, we finish it and we are able to report it. So basically, the TRPV1 expression or molecule is usually this receptor is associated with pain. Specifically, it was first reported to be activated, these receptors in the neurons when uh, there is a exposure to uh, spicy stuff or parang or capsicum or something like that. So technically, yung the flavor of spiciness is actually not a flavor, it's actually pain, di ba? So anyway, what we tried to explain in this paper or characterize is empathy or the ability of animals, even lower form of animals such as mice, to feel the pain of others, even if they're not technically being exposed to noxious stimuli themselves. Just seeing others be in pain apparently activates the pain sensors in their brain as well. So first, what we tried to prove was um, the TRPV1 receptors increases when the animal is subjective to pain. So we were able to prove that, and what we did was we made uh, partner mice. We kept them for very long time, like around 3 weeks, so they can develop a bond. And then one animal, we injected a small amount of formalin in order to induce pain. So this animal is the demonstrator. So that animal wherein there was induction of pain really increased the TRPV1 receptors, as well as these TRPV1 neurons were also very, very active. So the sign of the active neurons would be CFOS. So CFOS, or the green color here, will light up. If it lights up, meaning upon death of that animal, that neuron was working. And then you can see if you have the color red in the cytoplasm and the middle green, it means that neuron is a TRPV1 expressing neuron, and it is working at that time. So you can see that the TRPV1 expressing neurons are activated, of course, in the pain receiving animals, and also in their friend, which was not really given any pain but just looking at them. So this is a very good proof that uh, the molecular proof of empathy in lower forms of animal. So it's exciting because we're able to prove that empathy is not specific to humans only. So animals, even the lower forms, also have these. And the TRPV1, a neuronal receptor usually associated with other types of pain, can also be utilized by the neurons in the brain for a social empathic style of pain. Okay, so quite interesting. Anyway, now let's move on to our glial cells. So our glial cells, actually, the glial cells constitute a majority of the cells which comprise your nervous tissue. So it's not actually the neurons that are in the majority, but they are the most usually discussed because they are the ones that actually do the main function of the brain and the spinal cord. But they are able to do that, they are able to survive because they are being supported by your glial cells. So glia means glue because in the olden times they thought these other cells that are not neurons are just there in order to glue the other neurons with one another. They didn't know that, they actually play a big role. Of course, now we already know that these glial cells actually have very, very specific roles, and their sole purpose is to basically support the neurons because the neurons are already so busy with their function in controlling and receiving information and synthesizing, etc. So they don't have time to metabolize and to protect themselves from pathogenic insults. Okay, so for the glial cells, we have total of 6 glial cells. 4 glial cells are only found in the central nervous system, meaning the brain and the spinal cord. Two types of glial cells are only found in the peripheral nervous system, meaning your ganglia or your nerve fiber trunks. Okay, first let's talk about the glial cells of your central nervous system. First, we have your star-shaped glial cell, and its main purpose is for the metabolism and the maintenance of the blood-brain barrier. So as you can see here, the capillaries embedded within your brain and spinal cord, of course, it has its own endothelial cells. But the one that dictates these endothelial cells to keep and maintain its tight junction so noxious stimuli will not be able to go from the blood within into the brain tissue, it's the function of the podocytes of the processes of your astrocytes. Okay? So again, in this preparation, this is an IHC using GFAP marker. And this GFAP marker specifically only marks or sticks to the astrocytes. Okay? So in the lecture manual, you will even read that there's two types of astrocytes. You have your protoplasmic and your fibrous astrocytes. Your fibrous astrocytes type would usually be the one that is seen in the white matter, while the protoplasmic type will be the one that is seen within the gray matter. But in general, both of them would turn positive for the GFAP antibody molecule when using IHC. Again, that would be your astrocyte. Metabolism and maintenance of the blood-brain barrier. Okay? Then, of course, we have the other one, the smallest of all the glial cells. So we have the microglial cell, and the microglia is a little bit special as well because it is the one of the very few cells in the nervous system that does not originate from the neuroectoderm. Okay? It is derived from the yolk sac. Okay? And these microglial cells, it is basically the macrophage of your brain. Okay? So its purpose is to defend the other cells within the nervous system from noxious stimuli or pathogenic insults. And you will know if the brain is undergoing repair or a defense against something if the microglia become chubby and plump because it means they are activated and they are in the process of producing substances that would remove or stop the onset of toxic or pathogenic insult. Okay? So actually, between the glial cells and the neurons are so specialized that they also do not have the ability to divide anymore. That's why when they die, they cannot regenerate in the majority of the neurons in majority of the brain tissue. But of course, there are parts of the brain that will still have um, dividing neurons despite it being in the adult brain. But usually, majority of neurons when you have already the animals already turned mature, then the neurons will stop dividing, and if some of them are uh, accidentally killed or they become dead in some pathogenic process, they will not regenerate anymore. And it will be your astrocyte which will form a glial scar. The astrocytes will proliferate and take the place of your dead neurons. Okay? So that's a key point. So that's why usually in the adult brain, the tumors are usually arising from glial cells or they call it glioblastoma because it is only the glial cells that still have the capability to subdivide and multiply even in the adult stage. While you will only get to see tumors that arise from neurons in the younger animals because the younger animals will still have a lot of your developing and dividing neurons. Okay? And the tumors or cancer is basically erratic dividing cells. So if the cell is not dividing anymore, there is a very little chance of it becoming tumorous or cancerous. Okay? So, again, going back to the fish story. So, earlier, the staining that we used was just H&E and now it is the same fish. And I tried to answer because no one else has actually investigated whether the markers for your astrocyte and your microglia can also be used to detect your astrocyte-like or microglia-like cells in the fish brain. So again, this is not yet published. So hopefully in the future, no, if you come back to this lecture, I may have or our team may have already shared the information. So these are preliminary unpublished works. So please do not share it to others yet. But hopefully in the future, we will be able to confirm these brown positive areas. And as you can see, not all the specific segments of the fish brain are positive for that specific type of glial cell. Okay? And then for the myelin sheath, we have your oligodendrocyte. Okay? So the oligodendrocytes are the myelin sheath producing cell in the brain, and spinal cord. And the key point here is one oligodendrocyte would be able to wrap its cytoplasm around several axons of different cells at the same time. Under the H&E, they say that the oligodendrocyte nucleus is very small as compared with your neuron, but actually the key point would be uh, in the white matter, you do not expect to see the nucleus of a neuron because the nucleus of a neuron is found in the cell body and the cell body is found in the gray matter. Okay, so this is just basically based on assumption. But of course, in order to be sure, the best way is to use immunohistochemistry with markers that are very specific for oligodendrocytes. Okay, next we have the cells lining the central canal of your spinal cord as well as the ventricles within the brain. This would be your Yes, this would be your ependymal cells, okay? Your ependymal cells, when it is located within the ventricles of the brain and not the spinal cord, they will become more convoluted, more complicated, and they will assume a different name. They are termed as your choroid plexus. And it is this choroid plexus which produces the bulk of cerebrospinal fluid actually. So your ependymal cells, while they also produce, but they're not the primary producers, and you will see that the ependymal cells technically looks like what type of basic tissue? If it's lining a cavity, it is basically like your epithelial tissue, but it is not epithelial tissue, it is just classified as epithelioid, okay? Epithelial-like. Because even though the cells are closely opposed, and then it even has this cilia for the movement, it doesn't have your basement membrane or basal lamina, which is one of the primary components of your epithelial tissue. Again, this is just a reminder that the body is not binary and there is a lot of in-betweens between the structure classifications. Okay? So again, these are your ependymal cells and they are the cells lining the central canal of your spinal cord and the ventricles of your brain. Okay? So in the peripheral nervous system, the myelin producing cell would be your Schwann cells or neurolemocyte. Okay? So here you can see your Schwann cell or your neurolemocyte. It's like 1:1 axon. And the axons of your peripheral nervous system, you would have your very, very long axons. Imagine you have the cell body of your neuron in the middle of your back in the spinal cord, and then this cell body would have a very, very long process, very, very long axon that can reach the end of your toe or reach the end of the finger. So imagine how long that axon is, okay? Since it is very long, there is a need to find a way to um, make the propagation of electric impulse quicker, and that is through the myelination, wherein several Schwann cells will wrap themselves around multiple times in one segment of the axon. So multiple Schwann cells or neurolemocytes will wrap themselves around to form this myelin sheath. And then they will leave out just specific discrete spaces where the conduction will be saltatory, meaning it will jump from one node to another, thus making the time needed to convey or propagate the signal from the cell body up to the um, uh, viscera or muscle organ that it will send the signal to very quick. But of course, there are also axon fibers that are not as long and will not need saltatory conduction. So in that case, they will share several of these short axons will share a single Schwann cell or neurolemocyte. Okay? So again, These are the nodes of Ranvier, and in between will be the internode, and the internode region or segment actually corresponds to one Schwann cell or neurolemocyte. So you would have a lot of Schwann cell or neurolemocyte that is wrapping itself around a single axon. If it is a myelinated type, if it's unmyelinated, it doesn't mean that there's no Schwann cell or neurolemmacyte. There is, but it's not able to create that wrapping pattern because one Schwann cell is sharing or wrapping around several axons at once, and there's just like this like invagination, okay, and no wrapping. So under the electron microscope, this is what it looks like. You have the axon in the middle, and you have the multiple turns and wrapping around of your Schwann cell or neural lemocyte. And here you have your neurolemocyte nucleus, and here you can see that there are invaginations, and in the invaginations, there are your axons. Okay? Schwann cells, neurolemocytes. And then finally, we also have your satellite cells or amphicytes, which surrounds the cell body of your uh, unipolar or pseudo-unipolar uh, neurons in the ganglia. Okay? So again, this is in the peripheral nervous system. So in the ganglion, there is no oligodendrocyte here, nor there is no astrocyte here, because it is a more simple um, location where cell bodies of neurons can clump together. So it's like a satellite office of your spinal cord. And this is usually found in areas of the body where there is a lot of complicated uh, group of organs or parts that need to be given axon fibers. Since it's too complicated, the body cannot just rely on the neurons within the spinal cord. It needs to provide areas that can actually house the cell bodies and can what can I say, can lengthen the travel or the length needed for the axons. Okay? Again, these are your satellite cells and amphicytes. Whenever you see this, and then you see this big, rounded cell bodies, then most probably you are viewing a section of a ganglion, which is under the peripheral nervous system. Okay? Again, these cells are your satellite cells and amphicytes, and they function to metabolically support your neurons in the ganglia. Okay? So how is nervous tissue organized? Basically, it is organized into your gray matter and your white matter. And as what we have said earlier, your white matter is white because it mainly contains the myelinated axons of your neurons. While the gray matter is darker because it contains the cell bodies of your neurons. And in the brain, um, the organization is that the white matter is in the central area because, of course, its goal is to project all the axons, the myelinated axons, down into the spinal cord. Where in the spinal cord, its goal is for these myelinated fibers to go out and spread and distribute itself in the body. That's why in the spinal cord, the white matter should be outside so it can readily give off this um, nerve trunks into where they are supposed to be or needed. Okay, so under the microscope, if you see a lot of these cell bodies, then most probably you are examining the gray matter. Okay, while if you are seeing very small structures, unlike this one, then we can assume that these are actually your glial cells. And here it says, oh, this is astrocyte, microglia, or oligodendrocyte. But in real life, guys, it is not advisable to identify the different glial cells in H&E preparations. It is best to always use IHC. Okay? Anyway, the key point here is you will only see the axons of your neurons and no cell bodies or dendrites. Okay? Just axons. Okay? So this would be your white matter and this would be your gray matter. Okay? Okay, for the brain here, you can see that different areas of the brain are very specialized and that of course there are species differences depending on the capability of the animal to do higher order thinking, and also this is tailored to the animal's behavior. Okay, here you can see the human. Then you would have the elephant brain. And as you can see, the more complicated, the more the cognitive ability of the animal, the more wrinkling there is, the more formation of your gyrus and sulci. So sulci are the imagination, the gyrus are the bumps. Okay? So whenever we see these foldings, again, it is the natural attempt of the body to maximize and increase what? The surface area. Okay? So, surrounding the brain organ would be, before that, here you can see that in neuroscience, in order to see the different sub areas of the brain, which has different functions. For example, some areas such as this one, the hippocampus, serves for the neurons, mainly work for the storage of short-term and long-term memory. Some areas here in this area, the neurons function for the fear and anxiety, and in some area it is mostly for balance, etc. Okay, so the specific parts is best appreciated, or if you become neuroscientists in the future, of course there are readily available atlases online. So one of my favorite and the one of the most renowned would be your Allen Institute Atlas. So here I think they have both. They have humans, mice, etc. So here, if you are interested, you can explore this later in your own time. Okay. So here you would see that the different areas of the mouse would have different areas, different names, and it will be able to see which specific function the neurons are serving. Okay? And then, in the context of the preparation of staining of the brain, specifically the brain tissue, it is one of the few organs that usually the routine staining is not H&E as with this one. If you see the brain that has a lot of tiny, tiny dots, it means the one that is being stained is the nucleic acid component or the cell body or the nucleus of the neurons. So this is actually your Nissl staining. Sorry, not the nucleus, the Nissl substance. It stains the Nissl substance, which is again the stains the rough endoplasmic reticulum as well as the ribosomal components. Okay, so yeah, so Nissl stain. So it can use your crescent violet, etc., which shows the cell body or soma of the neurons as well as the glia. So the darker it is, it means there are more cell bodies in there. And if it's light, then maybe that part is mostly just the dendrite or the axon. Okay? So this Nissl stain is most usually uh, used when trying to see the organization of the neurons within your brain or spinal cord. Okay? Now let's go to meninges. So we talked about the different tissue components, and finally, nervous tissue components. But this one, for the meninges, is basically the connective tissue covering of your brain and spinal cord. Okay? Here, you would see the skull. And after the skull, you would have your dural meninges and then finally your brain. So earlier, we talked about the components of the brain, and apparently, the brain is covered by this very fibrous and very sturdy covering. Paper-like covering, maybe. So in the brain, so here you can see if this is the skull, you would have your dura mater. So dura means durable. Okay? And then underneath it, you would have your arachnoid matter. When you say arachnoid, what do you think of? Arachnid, spider, right? Because the arachnoid matter looks like the web of your spider. And it is here in the arachnoid matter where the small blood vessels that supply the brain can enter. And finally, the most intimate or the nearest meninges which uh, is near the actual brain would be your pia mater. Pia means pliable. So under histology, this is what it would look like. Your dura mater is made up of thick bundles of collagen, and then you have your wispy web-like structure of your arachnoid matter or membrane, and the space inside it would be your subarachnoid space, and then your pia mater is the one. So here it just got lifted due to the tissue processing, but here you can see that this is the one that is usually seen in preparations, only the pia mater, because usually the dura mater, when removed, it sticks with the skull. Okay, so I'm not sure if in the laboratory we have preparations that shows the skull, the dura mater, and the arachnoid and the pia mater. Okay, but hopefully we'll be able to create some soon if we don't have it yet. Okay. Okay, for the brain, again, the brain is divided into your cerebrum, your brainstem, and your cerebellum. Okay? And in the cerebrum, you can see that there's, even in the subgross view, there's a very different shading, right? Because there is a different way with how the neurons in this area is organized. So the neurons in the cortical areas is organized into six not so distinct layer, right? You can't really tell where each layer starts and where each layer ends. But don't fret because there's a lot of references that would help you in differentiating these six layers, okay? These layers are named based on the shape and size and morphology of the resident neurons that can be seen in each specific layer, okay? So, the majority of neurons that would be seen, although they look quite different and arranged differently, different concentration and spacing, they are most likely, if not all, are multipolar in shape, right? So, the multipolar shape, as long as there is more than one dendrite, it is already multipolar, and then they would have sub-classifications because based on the arrangement of the multiple dendrites, it will have a different name. Okay? Here is another reference trying to explain the difference between the different layers with the different names, and then where these specific neurons will uh, bring their information to, and which regions will receive the information that each layer is sending out. Okay? Then the most important thing is for you to be able to recognize if you are looking at an area of the cerebrum or if you're looking at the cerebellar area. The cerebellar is one of the most recognizable areas of the brain because it has only three layers, right? The molecular layer, the Purkinje cell layer, and the granule cell layer. So all these three layers are layers of the it has a lot of neurons. It is your gray matter. And the white matter is very thin in the central area. Okay? So here again, your gray matter is divided very distinctly into three layers. Okay? Again, we have your molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, and the granular cell layer. So as you can see, the middle layer is called that Purkinje because Purkinje, capital P, someone has discovered this and described it, would have these very, very big types of neurons, no? So here you can see. And the granule cell layer are also neurons, but they're quite smaller, but they are also multipolar, and they would have a somewhat different function and connectivity with the Purkinje neurons, Purkinje type. Okay? This Purkinje cell is the primary main effector unit of your cerebellum. these Purkinje cells, they are inhibitory cells and they function to basically control the movement of the animal by inhibiting the overexertion or over movement. That's why when there is a problem with the Purkinje neurons of your cerebellum, you would have the incoordination or the uncontrollable movement. Okay? So this is quite special in the brain because usually in the other parts of the brain, the function of the neurons is to actually excite and to elicit an effect or a movement. So here at the bottom, you will see that these are neither Nissl stained nor are they H&E stained. This is actually true silver stain. And in the silver stain, the neurons are, uh, sorry, the structures that are stained are the neurofilaments or the cytoskeletal parts of the cell, not the cytoplasm, not the cell membrane, not the nucleus. It's the intermediate and cytoskeleton, the neurofilaments. Okay, that's why you are able to see until the very end of all the dendrites and the axons. So we have actual slides in the laboratory, which I personally prepared and took home from my laboratory in South Korea. So maybe you are the only veterinary students in the Philippines who have access to these silver impregnated brain tissues. So please, especially for the reporting group, please make sure that you are able to create very good videos on it because you are very lucky because you have these resources. Okay, so please do not forget to ask your faculty in charge where this silver stained brain slides are so you will be able to appreciate your multipolar neurons and the other types of neurons. Okay, so for the spinal cord. So for the spinal cord, we also have the presence of your meninges, just like in the brain. So it's just continuous. Okay. Okay. So here you still have your dura mater, durable, you have your arachnoid matter, web-like, and then finally you have your pia mater, the one that is very pliable because it really inserts and attaches itself to the surface of the brain or spinal cord in every nook and cranny. What else? So again, as a review, this is already discussed in detail in the Beta 105 video, but here you can see that this time, the gray matter or the area which has your neuron cell body is in the middle in order to give way for the out, out pocketing or processing of your axons or your nerve fibers. And here, you can see that there's your dorsal root for the sensory and the ventral nerve root for the motor function. Okay, so here you can see that you have the dorsal horns and the ventral horns of the gray matter. And here again, earlier we examined this canal, and when we zoom in, we said that again there's your glial cells, specifically your ependymal cells. Okay, so again, these are the meninges of your spinal cord. Here you have your gray matter and your white matter. Okay, so actually the shape of your gray matter will change depending on the level wherein you took your spinal cord section. Okay, if the spinal cord was taken along the level of, for example, the legs or the arms, the ventral horn, which houses the big motor neurons, motor in terms of function, and multipolar in terms of structure, they are usually in here. Okay, together with the smaller interneuron type of um, functional classification of your neurons. But anyway, the bigger the ventral horns, it means there is a more need for that segment of the body to control the motor movement, such as the legs, no? So for humans, it's in the near the sacral area. But of course, if the animal, for example, is a bird, then it will be near the cervical area because that's where the wings are, where it needs to control the movement of muscles more. Okay? Then our peripheral nervous system, again, it also, aside from the nerve fibers, we have our ganglions here. Okay? And the nerve fibers themselves. So if you are um, studying macroscopic or gross anatomy, or if you have already studied it, these are the actual pasta fettuccine looking like things. So when you identify the nerve, these are your actually nerve fibers. Okay? So here you have your ganglion or connection of your co compact aggregation of cell body. So normally these cell bodies in the central nervous system, they are located in the gray matter. But if they are not located in the gray matter of your spinal cord or your brain, and they are located outside that, then the term is ganglion. Okay? And again, the uh, the the neurons are unipolar or pseudo-unipolar if the ganglion's function is for sensory. Okay? Again, you have the presence of your amphicytes. Okay? And then you have your nerve trunk fibers. This one, again, the aggregation or clump of several axons of several cell bodies located here or here, and then the clumps of their axons are located here or here. Okay? And the key point, we have lots of very good slides in the laboratory, is that in the peripheral nervous system, you are able to examine histologically the organization of the axon fibers. Because these axon fibers in your, this is called as your nerve trunk. So, just like in your muscle fibers, remember, we have the epi, peri, and endo. So, we also have the same thing here. But instead of muscle fibers, we have your axon fibers being grouped into subgroups. So, first, the outermost one would be your epineurium. So, the key word now is, the suffix now is neurium because it pertains to the nervous system. Before, it was meisium because it has something to do with the muscle. Okay? So, after the epineurium, within it would be your nerve fascicles. So, this is the nerve trunk, the whole thing. Then, you will have the nerve fascicles. Each nerve fascicle is surrounded by your perineurium. It is composed of loose connective tissue plus the endothelial-like cells, which tries to form a barrier which prevents noxious stimuli from easily influencing and affecting this very important conduit of information, your axons. Okay? And then, within each axon, it is surrounded by your endoneurium. Okay? So, myelin sheath and then endoneurium. Again, endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium. Endo, peri, epi. Okay? So, in the laboratory, you will realize that, oh, it will look different if it's, the preparation was cross-section or longitudinal. And it is only in the longitudinal section where you will be able to see this structure, the nodes of Ranvier, right? So here, you're able to see the nodes of Ranvier. And the pink stuff in the middle, those are the axons. And the space immediately surrounding it, the yellowish one, would be your myelin. And here in this picture, you can even see nuclei of your Schwann cell or neurolemmacyte because you know that this is your nerve trunk and this is your peripheral nervous system because there is the myelination here. Okay? So again, here is another preparation of your nerve trunk in the cross section and in the longitudinal. Again, some structures such as your node of Ranvier are only observable in the longitudinal sections, while some structures are best appreciated in the cross section, specifically the epineurium, perineurium, and endoneurium. So you will see here, if you are looking at the cross section, the axon is in the middle, the darkly staining structures, and then the myelin is like the donut wall surrounding it. And it's the same here, dark axons and lighter pink myelin sheaths. Okay? Again, Um, Another usually uh, special stain that it's used when you want to visualize the myelin sheath would be the use of Luxol Fast Blue. So I also have experience with using Luxol Fast Blue. So normally during H&E, when you are processing, the simple lipids are washed off with the alcohols and other substances that is used to process and fix the tissue before it can be sliced into thin sections. But if you are not gonna use H&E and you will use Luxol Fast Blue, the substances in the Luxol Fast Blue will stick to the more complicated lipids that are usually found with protein. So they will bind with the lipoproteins of your myelin sheath. Thus, we are able to visualize the myelin sheath with the color blue if we use that special stain. But routinely, when we see H&E preparations of your myelin sheets and it looks like as if it's just a blank space, that's not an artifact, right? It's the actual appearance of a myelin sheet. So we expect it to be like that. Okay? And then another part of the peripheral nervous system will be the ganglia, not found not your sensory ganglia, but your autonomic ganglia, which means these are the ganglia which do not function to sense stimuli. Their function is to uh, uh, provide autonomy or dictate the involuntary control of some organs of the body, such as your GIT. Okay, so when you eat your isaw or intestines or the, of course, the muscular layer of your tubular organs, they are mainly controlled by your autonomic ganglion. So, aka your myenteric plexus. So, it's usually located in the middle, in between of your outer longitudinal and inner circular layers. Okay, if you close it up, there. What you will see here is that the cell bodies of your autonomic ganglion does not look like the cell bodies of the ganglion in the sensory ganglion earlier, which are plump and which have a very neat row of satellite cells. Here, the satellite cells are not very pronounced and there is like just an irregular clump of cell bodies. This is so because uh, the autonomic neurons are not unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. They can be multipolar in nature. Okay? And then we also have our end plate. So the end plates we have already talked about is this is basically the connection, the part of the nervous system which is closely opposed or is the nearest to the muscle. Okay, if we zoom in, so these are the motor end plates, and here you can see that this is part of the nervous system, and this is already a part of your musculoskeletal system. And the motor end plate is a very, very good point which demonstrates to us that the how the uh, nervous system functions to control other organs system. Okay. So we have actual preparations of your motor end plates, and be very careful during our assessments because depending on where the structure is being pointed, it can change its organ system, right? If it's pointed in the striated muscle, that it will be your musculoskeletal system. But if it is pointed into these end terminals of your axon or your motor end plate, then it is basically in the middle of your muscular and nervous system. Okay? Again, we have excellent slides of this. So please, especially for the reporters, do not forget to create videos and examine these slides. Okay? So that's all for this topic. Quite lengthy because a lot of specialized architecture, a lot of information. But nevertheless, this is just a rehash with some additional information of the topic in Beta 105. Okay? So again, do not forget to accomplish the attendance form. Uh, Again, only use this attendance form if you are a student of first semester, school year 2026-2027. If you are somebody from the future, please use the current QR code being utilized by your class. And for the current students, again, we have an online quiz later, quiz number 3 at 9 p.m. All right? Thank you.